My name is Roisin. I come from the west of Ireland, which is the most important thing about me, but I'm based in London. You may have heard me on Pray As You Go. It's my holy voice. I don't usually speak like that. And when I'm not moonlighting on the fringes of Ignatian spirituality, I'm a children's social worker by day. So part of this evening's kind of meditation is, I guess, informed by that, because I spend my day trying to think about a child's lived experience and the age and stage of a child as they go through life. And as it happens, 12 is the only piece of Jesus's youth that we encounter in scripture, but more of that anon. To start with, a slight reminder that we are not floating heads in 2D boxes stacked upon one another on a screen. So I am going to invite you, if you would, to stand up, and if you can, and we're going to have a little shake just to remind ourselves that we are full incarnational beings. So if you haven't turned your camera off by now, my guess is you'll start. All right. Have a stand up and take a little shake. One foot and the other foot. And then you might want to stand on both feet and swirl the knees around a bit. You can add the hips in, depending on your era. This will be channeling your Elvis or your time warp. Beyonce was probably more my own. More younger people still. Miley Cyrus, I think is the thing. It was Billy Ray Cyrus's daughter for people who are a little bit older than that. Anyway, back to the shaking. Give your belly a couple of pumps. So you just let it out and let it in. If you're a yogi, it's known as Kapalabhati breathing. The idea is that it just gives your organs a little bit of a massage. Shake the rib cage and the shoulders. Shake the arms, elbows, wrists. Flick out the fingers a little bit. Okay, shake it all out. 5 seconds of full on shaking. Lost a hair clip. And arriving a little bit more into stillness. Just tilt your head one way, stretching out one side of the neck. And then the other way, other side of the neck. We'll bring the head back to center, then lift the chin. Front of the throat gets stretched. And then drop the chin, back of the neck gets stretched. Bring it back to center. Another moment, you'll be glad you don't have your camera on. Scrunch up your face, real squeezy. And then release it, letting any tension in the face, jaw, mouth, relax. And then you may be familiar with tapping. It's a nice little release of tension. So I'm just going to tap on the crown of the head and then down the sides to the back of the head and the back of the neck. On the forehead, along the brow, temples, cheekbones, the top of the lip, the chin, and then along the jaw. Then bring it down the sides of the neck and just tap along your collarbone. And then you might like to give yourself a bit more of a thorough massage of the neck and shoulders. And it turns out you are a fully embodied human being on this earth. You can come back to seated with me if you like. We spend so much of our time looking out from our eyes that we tend to forget that that too is part of our physicality. So with me for a moment, just take a soft gaze to wherever your horizon lies. Start at about eye level and then lift the gaze a couple of degrees. So it's just slightly above perpendicular. And imagine that you are looking from the very front of your eyes. So the point of focus is originating at the front of the eyes. It's more of a mental exercise. And then if you can, think about that point of origin where the gaze begins, moving from the very front of the eyes and then drawing back a little bit, maybe to the mid-eye. As you do that, you might notice that your peripheral vision gets a bit more expansive. Continue to draw that point further back to the backs of the eyes. You might find the focus becomes a little bit less blurry, but again, the expanse of your vision is growing. And then continue to bring that point of where the focus begins further back until you imagine that you're looking from the back of your head out. And at that point, you may like to close down the eyes or take a soft gaze down in front of you. Make sure you are seated comfortably now. And that point of awareness that was right at the back of the head, allow that to rise up to the crown of the head. And then maybe lift that awareness higher still. So we're now getting to the stage where you imagine maybe that you're floating above yourself and looking down upon you. And you can see you, your body, the room around you. Getting a more and more expansive perspective. So keep zooming out and now become aware of all of the other people that are in your building, your home. Start to include all the people on your street. We're taking a bird's eye view now of all the people and places and things in your locality as they go about their lives and interact with one another. And like us, all those other people are probably connected one way or another to people further afield. So you might know in Dira's web, the idea that there is a thread of connection that joins all of us. And that at every point of nexus where those threads cross is this kind of gem or pearl of great price, so that the whole globe is essentially kind of glistening with these gems of connection between people. So zoom out more from the street and imagine like a satellite view of your whole area, town. See the whole of England, Britain, wherever you are around the world, your continent. Indeed, now we're all getting a sense of a globe. Imagine that you can see the globe spinning on its axis in front of you. And as you zoom further out, this planet happens to be just one circling around this burning star. As you continue to zoom out, you realize that the star is just one of 100,000 million in just one galaxy, among millions more in this vast cosmos. So you're looking on to the whole universe. And consider that now you're taking a God's eye view. So you're sharing in God's perspective on all of creation. And become aware that you are looking at God's creation with God. And God's quite excited about all of this wonderful work that God's done. And points out way over there, this kind of swirling mass of stars, and takes you closer. So close that you can see one in particular. And God wants you to see this one because there's a rock spinning around it, this pale blue dot that God has taken a particular interest in. That planet is teeming with life that God created. God has put the very spirit and lifeblood of God's self into every single creature on that planet. God has initiated life. God dwells within every life and labors for the good of all of this creation. This is also the place that God invites you to participate. So keeping a sense of God's perspective, zoom back in. See the oceans of the earth and be mindful of the currents that flow within the oceans that are of God's making. The continental plates that are moving and drifting alongside one another. And you'll see that there's mountains and deserts and plains and rivers and ice caps. And if you look closely, for some of us, about 50 to 60 degrees north, you'll find this funny shaped island, a little bit covered in cloud. And if you're elsewhere in the world, you know what you're looking for. Start to zoom into the land that you are in. And know that God seeks you out in that place. So you have a view of the whole country, and then you get closer to your area, region, see the landscape that's local to you. Get close enough that you start to see the people and animals and things that are pottering about. Get to your road, your building, and come right back into the very room where you are now, contemplating God, contemplating you. Pause here for a few moments, taking a couple of deep breaths. Knowing that as you inhale, you breathe in the breath and life of God. And as you exhale, you participate in God's creation and make a return gift of love and life to this world around us. I want to tell you a story. And it's about a time when God's very own Son walked this sacred earth. So this boy grew up in quite a devoted Jewish family, and they celebrated all the religious festivals in the customary fashion. So at Passover time each year, the whole village would make this communal pilgrimage to the temple. Now, one year, when Jesus was hitting adolescence, Jesus is his name, by the way, he got separated from his family. And story goes that he spent 3 whole days and presumably 2 whole nights in the temple. But the details, now they're a bit sketchy. Fortunately, you know this boy. You know his background. You know the man he turned into. So I thought that you'd be pretty well placed to fill in the gaps. I'd like you to imagine that you are there in the temple with this boy. There with the Word made flesh in the flesh. And I invite you to discover what he got up to. Now, what we do know is he's about 12. He's a long way from home. And in our contemporary understanding, a 12-year-old is becoming quite concerned about their identity, who they are, what they're about. They're starting to turn more and more to maybe friends and community and sources outside their family for guidance and assurance. In Judaism nowadays, it's the time of bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. So a coming of age when someone is not only responsible for their own faith development and observing the precepts, but also now responsible for their own actions. There's a moral development theory that says, again, about this age, we move from behaving to avoid censure by authorities to behaving in a way that's more about ensuring cohesion in community. And for this particular boy, it's also about this age when his mother, his earthly mother, learned of and accepted her role in the history of salvation, our redemption story. And maybe Jesus knew about this when he came to the temple that year. So let's say you are with the boy in the temple. And you spend these few days together. I'd like you to picture the temple. What's the architecture of the place? Who was there? Was it busy? What are the people like? Are they children, beggars, or priests, or vendors, or teachers, or who's around? And what happened that you, maybe the 12-year-old you, and this boy became separated from friends and family? Take a look around and notice what you notice. Is there furniture floating around? Ornaments? Just explore this sacred site with your companion. Notice the texture of things, the temperature, the sounds and the silences. When you encounter people, notice the expression on their faces, what they're wearing, the tone of their voice, their posture, the way they move. And if you and Jesus are spending the night away from parents and those you know, how do you manage that? What provisions do you have with you? Are you warm enough? Did you bring spare clothes? A satchel full of food? Do you share what you have, or do you have to rely on the kindness of strangers? Or do you just get hangry? And how do you feel about the whole thing? Is this like some mad adventure, or is it a bit intimidating and scary, or something else entirely? During the night, are you able to sleep? So over these days, we know that Jesus sat among the temple's teachers and that he was listening to them and asking them questions. Maybe place yourself in that scene as part of this circle. What are the questions that Jesus is asking? What are the answers that he's getting? How does it seem to you that he responds to that information? Maybe you have questions that you want answered. And if that's the case, you're welcome to turn to Jesus or someone else in the scene and put your question to them. Now, this boy Jesus, he seems to have an uncanny wisdom, and everyone around seems to be astonished. What is it about him that surprises them? And how about you? How do you react to Jesus? How are you feeling as you watch him and listen to him and spend time with him? I'm going to be silent for the next 2 minutes, just to allow you to dwell in this part of the story and perhaps speak to Jesus about what's stirring in you. So after 3 days here, Jesus' earthly parents show up, and they're not best pleased at this disappearing act. So they've been beside themselves with worry. And they've clocked up a couple of extra miles that were not part of the plan when they left home. Watch the interaction now as his parents spot him. Listen to his mother admonish him. What's the expression on her face, her tone of voice? And pay attention to how Jesus reacts. What's his facial expression, his body language? He tells his parents that he had to be in his father's house. That's the reason he gives for being in the temple all this time. What sense do you make of that? What comes up for you as you watch this reunion of Jesus and his parents? Where in the scene are you now? Does anyone notice you? Do they make eye contact? Do they say anything? Do you have something to say? Perhaps these days have really dragged, or maybe they've flown by. But finally and belatedly, Jesus is leaving with his earthly parents. Take a moment to say your goodbyes for now. And know that Jesus goes with his family to increase in wisdom and in stature and in the favor of God and all those around. If you have ventured to another time and space, slowly, gently draw yourself back to the here and now of a Wednesday evening. In a moment, we're going to return to our breakout rooms. And it's just intended as a listening space